I am absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you today to start the new book of Shemot or Exodus. And the title of the book, either it being Shemot or Exodus, I think says a lot about what the emphasis of the book is. In Hebrew, we call it Shemot, we call it names. In the English translations of the Bible, both in terms of the Tanakh and then the Christian Bible, they call it Exodus. Exodus, of course, focuses on the main plot line of the actual Sefer. Shemot really focuses on the first four psukim of this week's Parashat, also named Shemot, because the rabbis generally try to name the Parsha after the first word of notable significance, right? So, for example, when we began Bereshit, of course, that first parasha is Bereshit, and then Shemot, the first parasha Vayikra is Vayikra, and Bamidbar, Numbers is Bamidbar, and so on. And I just, as I always do in these teachings, I want to begin with a quick overview of the actual parsha, and then we're going to move into the meat of what we're going to do today. So the parsha of Shemot is the first five and a couple of verses, chapters of the book of Exodus. Now, again, those of you who've learned with me before, or those of you who learn with me regularly, know that I often say, and this is not just me, it's a scholarly consensus, right, that the chapter and verse division is something that we as Jews adopted later. It is not original to the text. This was an innovation created by monks, I believe, in the 3rd or 4th century of the Common Era as a quick and easy reference tool. We then adopted it. Why do I say this? Because generally and often chapter divisions don't make a ton of sense. Some of them do and some of them don't. But if we think of the Torah as a text without any kind of breaks in chapters, we have all kinds of other breaks in Torah in terms of how the Torah is scribed. But in terms of actual chapter division, that is not so relevant. Why am I saying all of this now? Because we're going to look at a part of this week's parasha that is in the 4th chapter of Exodus. That is a little bit, it's very contiguous with the chapter before. So I'm going to go back to a quick summary of the parsha, and then we'll jump in from there. So we get the first four psukim where we learn about those who were in Egypt. Of course, we know that our ancestor Yaakov and 70 family members went down to Egypt. Of course, Yosef had been there for a long time. We just went through the Yosef cycle a couple of weeks ago, and we ended it with Vayikash a couple of weeks ago. And then last week in Vayechi, we get all of the brachot on Yaakov's deathbed. Now we're in Egypt, and there's a new pharaoh who's arisen over Egypt. I'm imagining many of us are familiar with this story. New pharaoh arose over Egypt who did not know Yosef. And what did that pharaoh do? The pharaoh enslaved Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. And we know in the first chapter that one of the things that Pharaoh says is, if there is a baby boy who is born, that baby must be flung into the Nile, chas v'chalila. Obviously, that is extraordinarily violent and not something to just brush over. But for the sake of our class today, we're going to note that and proceed forward, but just naming the violence there. And then you have the two midwives, and there's a lot of commentary where they Egyptian, where they Hebrew. We're going to put that aside for our class today, but just as a note, Shifra and Pu'ah, who defy Pharaoh's order and say, actually, no, we're going to let all of the children live. And of course, there is a Levite who has a son with Yocheved. Amram and Yocheved are Moshe's parents. They have Moshe. They realize it's a boy. They put him in a basket. They put him on the Nile. And then Bat Paro, the daughter of Pharaoh, rescues him, adopts him, and raises him in the Pharaoh's palace. Moshe grows up there. Fast forward a bunch after some interpersonal challenges between Moshe and navigating. Moshe is very upset that a Hebrew is being beaten mercilessly by an Egyptian, and Moshe kills that the aggressor there. And then we move forward, and Moshe is in his later years, and there is the very famous scene at the Snet, the burning bush, and Hashem reveals Hashem's self as Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I will be that which I will be. Hashem says to Moshe, you're going to have this mission, and there's this scene at the burning bush, and of course the bush is not consumed, right? Many of us are aware of, many of us know this for lots of different reasons. It's a very famous scene. And then we fast forward into what we are finally getting to today, which is Moshe's self-doubt. And I brought today, so I'll invite us to post that link into the chat. I brought today a link to 3 passages in Shemot, one of which is in this week's Parashat in chapter 4. The other 2 are actually in next week's Parashat, which is why I talked about chapter breaks. We have our own divisions between Parshiot. 2 episodes for next week's Parsha relate directly to this week's Parsha, so I brought all 3 of them. We're going to mostly focus on the piece from this week's Parsha. And this text in the 4th parak of Shemot and 4th chapter of Exodus is a text that is personally very meaningful to me, which is why I wanted to teach it. This is actually one of my favorite Parshiot in the Torah. And I'm going to invite us to kind of expand our thinking about this text. So to kind of refresh ourselves, we're not going to read all of chapter 3 and all of chapter 4 because unfortunately our time is short. But Moshe, of course, had the scene at the Snet, the burning bush, and he's really unconvinced. He's like, I really don't want to do this, Hashem. Like, why are you making me do this? I really, really don't want to do this. And even though there's the beautiful theophany, we call it a theophany, where God reveals God's self to Moshe, and there's the beautiful reminder to Moshe to please remove your shoes as you are standing on holy ground. And Hashem tells Moshe that Moshe will be sent to Pharaoh, and there's going to be a whole mission of Moshe bringing the people out of Egypt. And Moshe is really deeply unconvinced and has a lot of self-doubt. And I think, a lot of commentators for the next, many, many weeks as we are journeying with Moshe Rabbeinu, which we're going to do from now through the end of 5784, a lot of commentators feel that, what are the ways in which Moshe shows up as a leader? What are the ways in which Moshe fails as a leader? I'm interested today in, rather than thinking about Moshe as a leader, I want to think instead about Moshe as an internal, or rather Moshe's internal landscape. How is Moshe feeling about his place and his mission? So that having been said, I want to now turn directly to the text. I'm going to invite someone, again, as we said at the beginning, if you are ready to read, please raise your hand and you will be called on. Please only read in the English. The English I brought today is from the newly revised JPS translation that was just published last year in 2023. So I want to invite someone to read the verses 10 to 16 in chapter 4. I will then say a few words, and then we will open it up to some comments and reflections.
We have 4 eager hands, and it is painful for me to not call on all of you. But I did see Hannah's hand first, and I'm going to ask you to unmute Hannah, and you can start with, but Moses.
But Moses said to God, please, O my sovereign, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Go on.
Yes, please.
And
Yes,
God
please.
said to him, who gives human speech? Who makes them dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, God? Now go, and I will be with you as you speak and will instruct you what to say. But he said, please, O my sovereign, make someone else your agent. God became angry with Moses and said, there is your brother Aaron the Levite. He, I know, speaks readily. Even now he is setting out to meet you, and he will be happy to see you.
Thank you, Hannah. That was beautiful. Okay, so things going on in the text, and I'm gonna name a few things, and then I want to open it up for folks to jump in. Um, we have Moshe saying to Hashem, "But why are you making me do this? I can't. I am a man of few words. I am a man of slow of speech and heavy of tongue." Right? There are all kinds of midrashim about why did Moshe have a speech impediment. We're gonna put midrashic tradition aside, and we're just gonna look at the shot. Because I think often, and those of you who've learned with me before know that I am really, really interested in what the shot actually says, and how sometimes I mean, and I love midrash as much as the next person, do not get me wrong, but sometimes we assume the midrash is the shot. And so we have no indication here of like what Moshe's speech disability is, if anything. We don't know if he is a stutterer. We don't know. We don't know what he means, but what we know is that he is not a man of words. We know that he believes that this task is a very oral task, both a A-U-R-A-L as in auditory and O-R-A-L as in speech. We know that he's like, how am I supposed to be an orator? That is not me. And Hashem says, without pause, Hashem says in response, who gave you a mouth? And then he gives a few other examples of who makes a person sighted or blind. Now, I want to just name a couple of things. One, I believe in reading the translations as they are and then commenting on them. You'll notice that there is the use of the word dumb or deaf. That is something that really I want to encourage all of us and in this room and beyond. For those of you watching this later, please do not. We do not use the language of dumb. It's deeply unfortunate to me that even in this most recent translation that's there, it shouldn't be. And this is not an issue of anything other than deep honoring of the humanity and dignity of all beings. So what I would have said there instead is just as it says seeing or blind, hearing or deaf is a similar parallel. And what I believe is happening here, right, is that Hashem is making a rhetorical point, right? This can often be understood theologically as, well, Hashem is the one that causes quote unquote disability, and therefore the ableism and the discrimination and all of that people with disabilities experience and all of the ups and downs of life in general. Well, that's just the way it is, right? I choose to read this very, very differently. I think what Hashem is saying powerfully to Moshe, and the fact that this is here in the Torah, I think is incredible. When Hashem says, "Who gave you a mouth?" Hashem is actually saying, I know who you are because I know all of my people. I know everyone and what their abilities are. And I believe, and I truly, and I think this is in the shot of the text. I believe that you have the innate ability to do this job. The reality is, you live in a body in which you experience a speech impediment. That is an obvious and real thing that you contend with every day. Obviously, this is, my own like outside interpretation of what Hashem is doing here. And I'm going to make it possible for you to do what you need to do through what we today call, of course, the Torah doesn't call it this, what we today call a reasonable accommodation. Hashem says, Aaron speaks well. Aaron will be your mouthpiece. You will tell Aaron what to say, and Aaron will say it. You will kind of be working together. As a very dear friend, may her memory always be for a bracha. Her birthday was the other day. Cheryl Grossman, Zichrona Livracha, as she really taught me. This text is one way the Torah is affirming that having reasonable accommodations is right there in the Torah. This is not a new thing, and that it's affirming the dignity and self-determination, of people of all different kinds of ability statuses. Now, I use the term people with disabilities professionally and personally. Obviously, the Torah does not. We also have to be very careful not to ascribe a particular identity onto Moshe that Moshe may or may not have ever identified with. That is taking it, the technical term of it is called presencing. And literally what presencing is when we put on to others that which we understand today. So I am using the term people with disabilities in this context because that is the term we use today. I am not making an absolute claim about Moshe. What I am instead saying is Moshe is very unsure of himself. Moshe recognizes that he does not have fluency. And when I say fluency, I don't mean that in terms of linguistic fluency. I mean that in terms of flow of speaking. Moshe doesn't have that. He's really anxious. And he says to Hashem, well, how am I supposed to do this? I'm super anxious. Hashem says, I created you as you are. I created you as you are, and I have deep, deep faith in your ability to do this. And I'm going to make it possible for you to do it. And what I think is so beautiful about this scene, it really actually reminds me of Genesis 1:27, the very famous teaching in the first Parashat of our Torah, that we're all created B'Tselem Elokim, that all of us human beings were all created B'Tselem Elokim in the image of God. And what does that mean? The commentators have a lot of beautiful explanations. What does it mean to be created B'Tselem Elokim? And effectively, it means, according to most, that either we have this inherent sense of dignity that can never leave us, or conversely, that we are able to partner with Hashem to create a dwelling place for Hashem. I believe that what Hashem is doing here for Moshe is reminding Moshe that too is part of that. That he too, like every other created being, has that sense of nobility within that cannot be taken away. And we'll see as we go on that doesn't actually quell Moshe's doubt, which I think is really important because we are a tradition, I believe, as a Jewish tradition, we are a tradition that really honors the reality of what it is to be a human being in a human world, right? We are a tradition that focuses on the everyday and sanctifying it. So we are not a tradition that says, oh, Moshe, I can't believe you didn't believe in yourself, like you're not a real leader. Instead, we say, Moshe, you are really aligned with how most of us human beings actually feel most of the time. So it's very, very honest and real. And I think that that's powerful. And I'm going to pause there and I want to open it up now to hear from others.
Rabbi, would you like me to read the chat, or we do actually have a hand raised? Do you have a
Let's
preference?
hear a hand raised, and then let's
Great.
read the chat, and then I'll take them all together because I want to hear as many voices as possible.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Arnold. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. When I've read this, I found coming up with a different interpretation. When Moses says, I have never been a man of words. When we've been introduced to Moses earlier, he's been a man of action and perhaps overreaction by killing the guard who is torturing one of the slaves. And this is perhaps because he's going to be arrested if he doesn't run away. It's an overreaction. And I think what God is trying to do is help Moses to understand that there's a lot of ways to react to things, including words. And this is, I mean, without giving away any secrets, this is going to serve him well during the Exodus because God is going to overreact and want to kill people and destroy the people. And it's Moses who has to come and sort of calm God down. And that's, I think, the main lesson that Moses learns. It's not so much dealing with Pharaoh, but dealing with his people and with God during a 40-year journey.
Thank you, Arnold, for that. And I will just add to that. That's really beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that. We know this summer, this late spring and summer, when we start reading Bamidbar, we're going to have plenty of instances, right, in which Moshe loses his temper, right? And he's going to have to deal with that. And there's going to be consequences for that, real significant consequences. And we journey with this every year because I think, as you said, there's so much for us to learn. So thank you so much for bringing that to us. And I'd love to hear the chat.
Sure. Yeah, we have people just affirming your honoring of Moshe, and that how refreshing it is to hear leaders express their own limitations. That's from Lois. And I think people are just really finding in this moment a lot of comfort in the affirmation of human life and daily living, and the challenges that come with it, and how wonderful it is to see that in Moshe. And of course, it wouldn't be Torah study without a few disagreements. Ross says that he has to politely disagree with Arnold, and that he says that God doesn't overreact, which I think is certainly a one way of looking at it. But we do have some more hands raised. Would you like to hear more comments, or would you like to go back to the text? Oh, you are muted. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Rabbi Lauren. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stop my screen reader from jumping around. So forgive me if that's been bothering anyone. If anybody's been hearing it, I deeply apologize.
No problem. Zoom has eliminated that, so we don't hear anything, but
oh, that's brilliant. Okay, so let's hear everybody whose hands are raised.
Great. So first we will hear from Joe, and then we'll go to Free.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. It occurred to me that Moses claiming to be slow of speech may represent his age. As people get older, they're not as fast to reply, or their thinking is a little slowed down, or there's some hesitancy. And I also question, why was Aaron on his way to meet his brother when he was so far away from their place of birth?
Yeah, I've always wondered about that as well. I really appreciate that, Joe. I've held that question for a while as well. If anyone has any thoughts on that, please jump them into the chat. And I also just want to appreciate what you said about Moshe getting older. Of course, right? He's in his 80s at this point. Thank you so much for your comments. Do we have any other folks with hands raised?
We have quite a few, so we'll hear from Free first.
Shalom. I happen to think about a couple of things. One, public speaking is feared more than death, even today in statistics. So he could just have a fear of public speaking. You got to tell someone who has been in bondage forever, and now you've got to do this assignment. That's just above us. Or you would think maybe he's thinking, I've never done this. I didn't speak in a small crowd. So now you want me to speak in this large crowd and then actually be your representative? Hashem is like, he's going, I don't think I can do that. But the other thing is as I was, I've been studying a lot more, is it seems that there's a consistent theme of who Hashem calls. He always seems to want what you don't want to give him. Whatever that is, he wants what you don't want to give. The rich man, okay, you can do all of this stuff, but give up your wealth. Well, I don't want to give that up. So it seems like the very thing that he feels most inadequate about, Moshe feels most adequate about, is the very thing that is going to strengthen and stretch him to be exactly what he's called to be. That's just the comment.
I love all of that so much. And I particularly really appreciate I appreciate all of it, but especially the last thing that you said about, part of it is, right? Like if we think about the word in Hebrew for sacrifice is coming from the shoresh, from the root to come close, right? That Hashem, like you just said, is asking us to give something we don't want to give, whether it's the best goat that we have, or the best, lamb, or our, ability that we don't want to give our voice, because that's scary. And also to what you said about public speaking and it being feared more than death, I think is 100% true. And I will say personally, like you're hearing me now, but when I was in rabbinical school, it was utterly, and I still get nervous whenever I speak, right? But it was unbelievably scary for me. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to mess something up. It's going to be, any number of things could go wrong here. So I think everything you're saying, especially the piece about Hashem asking us for things we don't want to give, that happens a lot. And I think if we broaden it even further, like we are often asked in the world by people we care about, by the society we're in, to do things we don't want to do. And how do we navigate all of that? So that was brilliant. That was beautiful insight. Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear comments in a row, and then I'll respond because I know we have about 15 minutes.
Yes, we'll go to Nicole and then Jay.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Rabbi Lauren, for mentioning that about people with speech disabilities and with other disabilities and using appropriate language. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I very much appreciate when people use appropriate language and ensure that their ministries are, in fact, affirming for everybody and accessible for all. And thank you so much for pointing out that Moses, God uses people with disabilities, and thank you so much. So
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much for all of that. Okay, let's hear from Jay.
So maybe the fact that Moses has speech issues of some unexplained type, he is able to compensate. He has other strengths, like the ability to listen better than most people. And listening is such an important quality in a leader. We think about the world today and our leaders today, and how many of them are not good at listening, and how much better things would be if they were able to listen to other people.
Amen. Truly, amen. And when, those of us who are hearing, to kind of go back to what Nicole said, those of us who are verbal, are hearing, are listening that way, there's a huge difference between hearing something and listening to it, really getting under the words to what's going on for that other person, what they're trying to express. And I think however we're leading, whether we're leading on a global stage, whether we're leading, in our own little circle, right? The more listening we can do, I think the better off we are. The more we understand other people and really understand them, not so that we can, not so that we can respond, but understand them truly because we value them. I think that especially right now, that's so important. So thank you for lifting that up, Jay. Do we have any other comments?
We have so many more comments. We have so many people who have their hands raised, and I just want to let you lead in terms of, do you want to listen to more comments? Do you want to go back to a piece of text? We do have under 15 minutes, so I just want to note that for you.
Okay, so this is what I really want to hear the comments. I also want to look at the next two sources, and they're both pretty short. So what I'm going to invite us to do right now is to, I will invite us to have one or two people. It really doesn't matter. It can be just one person. We're going to look at two sources from next week's Parashat. They are directly connected, I believe, to this text we just looked at. And they continue to explore the theme of Moses and Moses' encounters with God. So let's look at those two texts, and then we'll come back to comments. Do we have anyone who's willing to read the sources 2 and 3?
Yes, so we have lots of hands raised, and they were raised to share their own comments. So I invite you, if you are no longer, if you would not like to read, please keep your hand raised if you would be open to reading. Okay. Let's go to Michael, and then I will share screen. Michael, if you're okay reading for us.
But only in the English, please.
Yes, as soon as I see it. Okay. God spoke to Moses saying, "Go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites depart from his land." But Moses appealed to God, saying, The Israelites will not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me who gets tongue-tied? So God spoke to both Moses and Aaron in regard to the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, instructing them to deliver the Israelites from the land of Egypt.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Was that both of the sources 2 and 3?
That was just source 2.
Okay, great. Can we have a reader for source 3?
Great. Andrea, if you don't mind reading source 3, I'll put the text back up on the screen.
I have the text.
Great.
I hope. And God said to Moses, I am God. Speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I will tell you. Moses appealed to God, saying, see, I get tongue-tied. How then should Pharaoh heed me? God replied to Moses, see, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command to you and your brother, and Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before I say anything more, I want to open it up to all those who had comments before, either to share those comments or to think about the question that I'm going to ask, which is, what do you notice in these texts about how Moshe does or does not react or continue to react to God's request?
Andrea, you are still unmuted. Would you like to share any thoughts?
Yeah, I would. It's really hard for me to think of the author of Deuteronomy as being a man of few words. It's
Yes.
which is and so there's a lot of ways you can interpret that God changed him in between the burning bush. You know, he did more of an accommodation than simply sending his brother. Or Moses was making excuses. He wasn't heavy of tongue and lips, like he says. But maybe it was just a language thing. Maybe, he grew up in the Pharaoh's household. Are these Israelites going to listen to some guy who, speaks Hebrew with an Egyptian accent? It feels like it so much needs explanation for the author of Deuteronomy to say, I am not a man of words.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andre. I think that is extraordinarily important. And, I think that there are a couple of other instances, right, whether it's later in this book of Exodus, whether it's in Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, like there are so many ways in which it's like, Moshe is not a man of many words, but then, as you said, with Deuteronomy, it's like the whole thing is Moshe's speeches. So it's a really important question, and that can be interpreted from the most traditional to the most non-traditional. And I believe all of those interpretations are extremely important to understanding Torah in its fullness, right? I firmly, firmly believe that we all bring such important perspectives. And, one of them is that, oh, well, the authorship changed, right? Or, any number of reasons, but it's still an important question to really dig into and to ask. So do we have any other hands?
Yes, we have Ellen, Michael, and Harry.
Let's try, if folks can keep your comments concise, we're going to try to hear all 3 of them.
Okay, great. So Ellen, I don't see you on screen, so we'll start with Michael, and Ellen, if you come back and we can see you, we will also ask you to unmute. Michael, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, good. I have a question first. In the early part of the Parashat, we learn that Moshe went out and observed one of the Egyptian masters severely beating a Hebrew slave, and Moshe felt kinship with the Hebrew slave. My question is, if he has been living in Pharaoh's household for 40 years, how is it that he feels kinship with a Hebrew slave?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that very question was addressed by Rabbi Dr. Mish Hammer Kasoy in the Pardes Parsha Shiur this week, thinking about like that was an issue that was directly addressed. And it goes back to, I'm trying to think back on that, and I'm trying to think of my own perspective on that as well. But I'm going to pause there because I want to make sure we hear other comments, and then I will go back to my response. And I realize we are almost at time, so let's hear other comments, and then I will close with trying to answer the questions and respond as concisely as I can.
Great. So we'll go to Harry and then Ellen. We cannot yet hear you, Harry. You have to unmute. There we
Is
go.
that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think it was an element of fear, actually, because, I mean, as you said before, he knew what to say when he had to say it. Considering where he came from and what he'd been through and had to go back to that situation. Like I said, somebody said earlier, he made excuses because he didn't get back in the same situation again as far as with Pharaoh. Even though it was a different Pharaoh, the situation was just as bad as when he left, probably even worse. So why we want to go back to that when he failed the first time around? Well, he may consider failing, but or left the situation.
That's really important. Thank you for that, Harry. All right, let's Ellen.
This is kind of a comment on our modern day vision of disability. And, as somebody who deals with invisible disabilities, it's such a hard, like the word itself, right? Not, not this. And, we've played around with differently abled or abled in another fashion or whatever it is. And it's really frustrating to see this kind of like go all the way back to this time when we are singling out people and, having dealt with invisible disability, and I can't even begin to tell you how many times I've been discriminated against. And I'm sure so many other people on this call who deal with disability have also experienced that. It's just really interesting to see this long line going back to this time of othering people in one way or another, be it the author of the text, who in my reading is not necessarily God. Because for me, in a world where there's a divine presence, we are not ordering people as greater than or lesser than. We're just saying, oh, this is this person does this or likes to do this. So I just, wanted to follow up on the other person's comments on that and just sort of say that, if we really are in a divinely inspired world, we will get to a world where we are perhaps recognizing without that, using like the Zen mind and not judging. Thank you.
I think that's a really beautiful way to close, actually. I'm so grateful, Ellen, for your comments. And I want to, name that, the author of the text here is engaging in hierarchy, and we do that as human beings, right? We absolutely do that all of the time, whether it's around disability, as you beautifully and poignantly shared, and thank you for sharing your experiences. It certainly resonate with me, and I'm sure that resonates with many others. And may we actually every day and in every way try to use our own agency to choose to try to create a better world where we don't engage in this kind of hierarchical thinking, where we accept people as they are, where there isn't the sense of, not this, not that, but everyone is their own unique, irreplaceable person. And I just want to really appreciate that comment. And I ask that, I bless that for all of us, that we are able to, in all of our own ways, like move into that place. Our species has done a very poor job of it, but we also can use whatever agency we have to choose in the ways that we can to act and to think differently. So I'm going to end us there and I'm going to turn it back over. Thank you so much.